So welcome to the side event of Global South-South Development Expo, the case of South-South cooperation for peace and development. Actually, we all know the strong linkages between peace and development. We know that poverty eradication is a key, and we know environment often, is the issue and can be, if you do it involving our people, it can be also a solution for a peaceful society and peaceful community. We know that engaging people, engaging women and youth are important for peace and development. However, when we talk about South-South cooperation these days, we think that there's still a great potential that we can tap into to utilize South-South cooperation as a modality to support peace and development. South-South cooperation has been very active in many areas of work, in poverty eradication and recently on climate change. In reality, there's also a lot of initiatives supported by developing countries to support peace and development, but I don't think there are enough discussion and debate and policy dialogue on this issue yet. So UN Office for South-South Cooperation, in our daily interaction with member states, we have heard countries asking for support to consider how to best utilize South-South cooperation so that it can also help address the issue of the linkage between peace and development. Our entry point as an office is to start from knowledge. So that's why I would like to extend a special welcome to those colleagues and participants, part of the global thinkers for South-South cooperation, especially the group that we recently established focusing on the subject of South-South cooperation in peace and development. The office is doing a few things. One is that we're trying to provide a platform to connect and empower Southern think tanks to look into this issue and to help us to scope what are the current practices of Southern countries in collaborating each other to address peace and development, what are the challenges and what kind of support is needed to move forward more effectively and tap into the potential. Second, we are also, like we have done, identifying good practices of South-South cooperation for SDGs. We are also developing a South-South in action to collect the solutions of South-South and triangular partners in addressing peace and development. In the meanwhile, we're establishing partnerships with countries that have expressed interest, with international organizations, with associations of countries to actually advance this agenda together. So today, I'm so happy that we have you here, and we will hear from a distinguished panel of their experiences and their insights and their analysis of the situation. Hopefully, those analyses will inform us as an office to work with our UN system, work with you as partners to advance this agenda. And it can also, because this Expo is happening at a timely opportunity leading up to the second high-level UN conference on South-South cooperation, BAPA Plus 40, that is to be held by Argentina in March next year. We hope that the discussion we have today can also inform and inspire policymakers' dialogues so that, together we can have a stronger commitment and more concrete solutions to work together to scale up the effort. I would love to stay with you to hear your discussions, but I have to regret that I will need to move to another meeting to open and chair. But I look forward to hear the outcome of this discussion. Now, I would like to hand over to our Senior Research Coordinator, Dr. Hani Basada, to moderate this session. And I'm sure our Senior Advisor on Peace and Development, Cecilia, will be able to explain more what the office is doing and how we plan to benefit from your wisdom and your partnership. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hani Basada. I'm the UN Office for South-South Cooperation Senior Research Coordinator. It's my distinguished privilege and honor to welcome you at this side event on the case of South-South Cooperation in the context of peace and development. Before we start, there's some housekeeping things that I would like to mention. There is a paper that's going around. If you can indicate your affiliation on this paper, and also to tick on the box whether you would be willing to receive and to look at our new draft publication, the case of South-South Cooperation on Development and Peace and Development. This is not a final product. This is a draft product. We would like to invite you to take a look and provide your comments, but this is not to be shared because it hasn't been approved by senior management. So do indicate whether you would like to receive this product, this publication, and whether you'd be willing to take a look and provide comments, but not to be shared. So you would need to be identifying yourself on this paper and have and tick on the box where you would be indicating your preference for doing so. And I'll be sharing this paper around. It is really my distinguished pleasure to moderate this session. It's a very, very exciting event, and I would commend my colleague Cecilia for initiating this dialogue and immense amount of work that has gone into the idea behind how to elevate the discussion around peace and development in the context of South-South cooperation. To start with, I would like to begin with a few comments on the overall view and concept of peace and development in the context of South-South cooperation to give you some context to this side event. The past 2 decades have seen South-South and triangular cooperation grow rapidly in scale, intensity, and modalities at all levels in global order, characterized by multipolarity. The growth of South-South cooperation is happening in a context of rising violent conflict, human-made humanitarian crisis. These challenges are mainly affecting countries in the global south, yet Southern proposals relating to the nexus between peace and development have not been a traditional area of focus for South-South cooperation initiatives in the past. And we hope this will change with all this work that's been generated in this area by our office. Existing South-South initiatives to prevent conflict and promote durable peace and inclusive long-term development are not systematic or documented, unfortunately. Similarly, the availability of information, the quality of research on the scale, and the impact of South-South cooperation have not kept pace with the growing demand by Southern countries for peer learning, further improved peace and development results. In practice, however, there are a growing number of collaborations, dialogues, and initiatives oriented towards the increasing Southern solidarity, mutual learning to promote durable peace and inclusive development. As we heard in the initial discussions at the beginning of the Expo, there's no durable peace without development, and vice versa. In this challenging context and in preparation for BAPA plus 40, there appears to be increasing awareness of the importance of creating spaces that promote Southern narratives, solutions, alternatives for positive and Southern-led peacemaking. There is more demand from member states, regional organizations, and civil society organizations to increase the attention paid to the added value of South-South cooperation as reinforcing force in promotion of peace and inclusive development. This side event, the case of South-South cooperation for peace and development, through presentations of research, evidence-based recommendations, and open policy dialogue and debate, aims to provide a space to share perspectives, analysis on the relevance and emerging characteristics of South-South cooperation for peace and development. It will offer an opportunity for us to reflect on the challenges and opportunities provided by South-South and triangular cooperation as modalities. To frame the discussions, our distinguished speakers will present initial findings of independent research projects that are currently underway, while listening to insights on conflict prevention, transformation from a select group of experts, and Global South representatives from think tanks and academia. I would like to take this opportunity now to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Cecilia Milesi, my colleague, who is the Senior Advisor of South-South Cooperation on Peace and Development at the UN Office for South-South Cooperation. Cecilia is an Argentinian sociologist, with
for sure.
that too, with over 20 years of experience from working in the areas of conflict prevention, transformation, inclusive development, human rights, and mobilization for change. Previously, she was Director of Planning and Performance at Conciliation Resources, a movement building coordinator at Amnesty International, and expert analyst at various organizations from Oxfam to the BRICS Policy Center to Inter-American Development Bank and Caring Foundation. A very distinguished member of our group of researchers at the office. Cecilia will be sharing with us some emerging trends and developments with respect to South-South cooperation on peace and development programming. She'll also share some insights on how South-South cooperation for peace and development could be put into context and in terms of better outcomes and visions in preparation for BAPA plus 40. Cecilia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hani. And definitely I'm a sociologist and a socialist from Argentina. So thank you very much for everyone who is here, in particular for the members of the Global South Thinkers on Peace and Development who are coming from Bahrain, Brazil, and Guatemala to share with you. Thank you also, Timothy, for making the time. I know we are in the third day of the Expo. We are all exhausted of going from one side event to the other, one panel to the other. So I appreciate your effort to sit with us today to do some thinking. So I will try to be short. I had prepared a PowerPoint, but now that I'm here, I feel that I will not necessarily follow the PowerPoint, and I will just flow with you. But anyway, it's good to have a PowerPoint just in case, no? My PowerPoint. So just to be follow what Grace and Hani were saying. No, if you want to project it. So what Grace and Hani were saying is very true. Peace as such has not been a focus of South-South cooperation frameworks, policies, and efforts. It's a very new emerging topic. We will see if in BAPA plus 40 there is agreement from member states and regional organizations, also with the listening to the insights of some civil society organizations and think tanks, if there is an interest for doing more and better systematic cooperation in this area of work. It's not a surprise that it's not an area of interest. perhaps because some countries in the Global South perceive that this is a Northern-led agenda, which many times also is related with securitized responses to peace, to intervention, and to imposition of certain standards and conditionalities on how peace should be done, or what peace should look like in the Global South countries. And as we know, our countries are very diverse. We don't all necessarily think that peace, stability, inclusion is exactly the same. So there has been resistance to this linear approach to thinking about peace. But we really believe that because of this rising context of conflict, violence, extremism, insecurity, not only in the most known civil wars or traditional armed conflicts that you may see in many countries, unfortunately, in Africa or in Asia, but also in Latin America, where the rising insecurity and level of violence with criminal gangs and criminal groups, drug trafficking, human trafficking, etc., are really having a toll on the life of communities, young people, and everyone who in everyday life have to suffer fear, insecurity, and be in one way or another affected by violence. So we understand as an office that it's time for South-South cooperation discourse to raise the voice and to say something about this without fear of engaging in a dialogue with global North countries and with mainstream actors. So this is what we are trying to do. Some of you maybe were present yesterday in the main thematic Solution Forum 6 with some participants from different member countries who share case studies. But we as an office have decided to establish a dedicated program to do more and better South-South cooperation. As the United Nations, as you know, it's positioned in an interesting space at a global level and may have the chance to facilitate and support not only exchanges and sharing of lessons at the regional level, but also at the cross-regional level. So catalyzing all the power from and knowledge and solutions and alternative to peace that we have in Latin America. I'm originally from Latin America, but also the solutions that we know and exist responses in Africa and Asia. So looking at the cross-regional exchange of lessons and point of view and proposals. So what we are trying is to facilitate this space. It's a very new space. Little by little, some UN agencies are really engaging with us. Some member countries, as you've seen yesterday, for example, Colombia to a certain extent, Indonesia in particular, the G7 plus countries are trying to accompany and support this work, but obviously it will also depend a lot in the willingness and the effort, including all of you now that they are here, and you will not be able to escape from the challenge. So to start, what we decided to do as an office is to look at the knowledge gap that there is in relation to the area of South-South cooperation and peace and development. This is something that we can do as an office. That's why we decided to create a group of Global South thinkers, of think tanks, and hopefully in the future maybe also could be civil society organization who has a strong action research component in their strategic plans to help us to look at for data, for information, and really give visibility to what is happening on the ground. There is a very interesting South-South exchanges happening, for example, at the level of ECOWAS in Africa, the level of the African Union, in Latin America, sometimes facilitated by organizations like UNASUR, etc. But we need to showcase them. We need to demonstrate that they exist and that there is a different approach, there is a different narrative, and different interesting offer of solutions and yeah, so I don't particularly like the word solution, but offer of alternative to build context of more peace and inclusion. So one of the things that just to give you a sense of time, it's been only 6 months since we created this particular program. So one of the things that we did to acknowledging this knowledge gap was to create this group of Global South thinkers on peace and development. So at the moment there is 10 think tanks from Latin America and Middle East and from Africa. We are hoping to grow, obviously, also to Asia and other countries in the next 6 months. The first product, as Hani mentioned, is this draft working paper that is being produced by the Global South thinkers first in a joint analysis session in Guatemala, and then by Dr. Isabel Siqueira and the BRICS Policy Center with Manuela as part of a team. So that's why also we wanted to share it with you and invite you to give feedback, believing that in the power of collective intelligence and knowing that you are coming from different backgrounds and can help us to shape it as well. So if you put your name, you will be contacted and you will be able to take one of these copies. Another thing that we are doing to provide a response to this knowledge gap will be a publication that we will do in the next 2-3 months. Is going to be one of the South-South in actions on peace and development. So as some of you know, our office publishes regularly the South-South in action, but none of them have been focusing on the area of conflict prevention and transformation. So what we are going to do is a meta-analysis of all these 12 publications and highlight the cases where you can see how the Global South countries have really provide concrete solutions and concrete ideas to overcome conflict in the Global South. So I don't really want to take time. I thought that maybe I could give you some examples of case studies, but perhaps I want to give now more time for the researchers present here to share their findings of the research that they have finalized, including this one. And to invite you to stay in touch with us and to share your proposal if you're interested and if you think that considering the South-South cooperation potential and South-South cooperation principles is important on contributing to conflict prevention in our countries. Besides the knowledge, we will then try to facilitate proper South-South exchanges, so to use our office as a platform to do more and better, create spaces for mutual learning. So for that, we're hoping to create a funding mechanism where we can really, in a systematic and coherent way, to bring member countries to learn from each other and to systematize and document that learning so we can then influence policy from practice. So that would be, as you can see in the presentation there, the other interrelated second and third outcome of the program. We are still far away from doing the South-South exchanges, and hopefully a little bit of policy influencing is being done. But again, we count with also this space of the Expo and the momentum that is generating to have the support to continue over the next year. So I thank you, and I give the floor to the main speakers.
Thank you very much, Cecilia, for providing this overview context to the work that the UN Office for South-South Cooperation is helping to lead and share with our global development partners in the Global South. As you have rightly pointed out, this is a new and emerging area of work, and we hope to lead by example and to provide some leadership in this area. Obviously, this is a contentious area of work, and it's something that's been highlighted by systematic pushback, but it's something we feel that it's important to address and important to raise in the context of how to promote better development outcomes. And we feel that systematically looking at the root sources of conflict provides an avenue for us to provide some leadership and address some of the systematic areas of development concerns affecting conflict and post-conflict affected states. I think you have raised important issues in terms of how to facilitate an exchange of ideas and building partnerships in the Global South. There's a lot of great information and data that exists. It has to be systematically put together. And the issue of the knowledge gap is important, and it's important because it does provide us an opportunity to give some context to what is out there and what is important in developing a narrative on the importance of peace and development in the context of South-South cooperation. Obviously showcasing different narratives and solutions that could be provided in addressing issues of conflict and peace by Global South partners is important, and we hope that the initiative that you're leading could help provide some context to that. Building a coalition of think tanks and knowledge hubs is important, and I think there's a lot that's going to be produced by our office in this area, publications, but also in terms of bringing together partners in terms of exchanging of ideas and knowledge and sharing of information. We have our next speaker, Professor Javier Brolo, a senior social political researcher at ASIES and a professor in political science in Guatemala. He specializes in evidence-based and theory-grounded research using quantitative techniques implemented in programming language R. He received his academic training at Francisco Marroquin University and the University of Essex. He has conducted research about elections, political parties, public opinion, and South-South cooperation. Professor Brolo from the Global South Thinkers Network will be presenting today Southern Voice think tank network research and offer some reflection on some of the peace and challenges affecting Guatemala and the wider Central American region. Professor Brolo, thank you. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Hani, for your introduction. And I want to start saying that it's a really great honor and privilege to have the opportunity to be here with you. And I wanted to thank the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation for inviting us to participate in representation of ASIES, Southern Voice, and ILAIP. Also to be sharing the table with Cecilia, with Hani, with Timothy Schoen, and Manuela and Shagufta. In my brief intervention, I would like to address three topics that I was asked about very briefly. What we think is the most important reason for working together to promote peace and development, and how ASIES and the networks it belongs to support peace and development through their work, and the challenges and opportunities that the Peace and Development Group has to make a contribution and advance in peace and development. The importance of working together to promote peace and development is something that has been present throughout all the presentations in this gathering. The phrase that has been repeated often is there can be no sustainable development without peace, and there can be no peace without sustainable development. And this is especially true in the context of increased violence and widespread poverty that countries in the Global South face. For example, in Latin America, there have been over 2.5 million murders since 2000. That's an incredibly high figure. And also 30% of its population in Latin America lives under poverty. So, however, the nexus between peace and development has not been a traditional focus of South-South cooperation, and most often these two issues and challenges are addressed separately. We think that working together to promote peace and development is needed because the lack of them are the two main sources of suffering that people in our societies experience. The lack of peace and the lack of development is the reason most people in our countries are suffering. And the solidarity among southern countries can help increase the chances of durable peace and sustainable development, respecting the principles, of course, of national sovereignty, national ownership and independence, equality, non-conditionality, non-interference, and mutual benefit. The relationship between violence and prosperity is a challenge that most societies have faced throughout history and geographies. It is also a very complex relationship, and therefore that's why we need to study it in depth and share knowledge. The threat of using violence has often been used as a means to secure privileges between groups in society and to protect subjects from expropriation. So how we manage the productivity, the production of wealth, has often been accompanied by the threat of using violence to protect it or to secure access to these resources and means for production. And each society has a unique experience, but those from the Global South have an extraordinary opportunity to learn from each other's successes and also to learn from each other's failures. At ACIES is a small think tank based in Guatemala. It means it's the Association for Social Research, and it has its origins in 1979 in the midst of the armed conflict in Guatemala. So from the beginning, ACIES has understood that peace and development are two sides of the same coin, and that both are necessary to create better living conditions for members of the society. ACIES has been promoted, or the approach ACIES has had is to generate knowledge to strengthen states institutions. So that's the approach ACIES has taken since 1979, over almost 40 years now. And together with that, it also recognizes that there's a social component to advancing in promoting peace and development. And what it tries to do is to try to articulate the demands the society has and translate them into actionable responses that government institutions can take. ACIES was involved in the transition to democracy in 1984 from authoritarian governments, and it played a big role in the creation of the institution, promoting the adoption of an ombudsman, for example, or an electoral court to be able to resolve disputes among the political actors that were competing for power. And it also accompanied the process that led to the peace accords in 1996. The founders of ACIES and the current president of ACIES is one of the people that signed these accords. And something they do, for example, is to take people like me and try to pass down the experiences that were learned in those processes, because the new generations, we didn't experience that. So we have to learn through them and together try to make the proposals. This effort is an effort that's shared by the institutions, the networks ACIES is part of. We recognize the value of unity and knowledge exchange. And some of the groups that ACIES is part of is ILAIP, Southern Voice. Southern Voice is a platform of think tanks from Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and also more regional local networks throughout Central America. One of the examples of the work that ACIES made recently on the topic of peace and development was to create an instruction manual for local leaders to engage members of the community to try to find alternative means for resolving their conflicts. Because many times conflicts go into the justice system, and the justice system doesn't have capacity to solve the overwhelming amount of conflicts that go. So the conflicts stay unresolved and people cannot cooperate and live together. But by identifying key individuals with the soft skills and the knowledge necessary to be able to bring the members of the community that have a disagreement and solve them, then they can work together afterwards. And that's an example at the local level, but also some of the leadership at ACIES was involved in crafting the Truth Commission after the elections in Honduras that were very disputed, for example, and also regional challenges like migration from Venezuela that is recently ongoing. However, the Peace and Development Group faces many challenges. On the one hand, the relationship between peace and development is very complex. Violence and poverty have many causes, ranging from historical grievances, competition for resources, organized crime, weak institutions, social exclusion, climate degradation, and many others. And these are all interrelated, complex subjects that cannot be solved with one action or quickly. Also, developing solutions requires the mobilization of resources to research, as well as sensitivity to context and culture. And implementing those solutions, it's not enough to have a good idea. How do we turn it into action? That requires leadership and coordination of actions among many actors that often hold incompatible positions. The Peace and Development Group has an opportunity by joining the efforts of its members to contribute with a holistic approach that incorporates insights from different disciplines and perspectives, from economics, from justice, from political science, from sociology, because they live in the same institution and can share each other's perspectives. The group also has the capacity to articulate solutions that are grounded in systematic and rigorous use of evidence, not only on a good motivation or a good purpose, but trying to learn from what works and what doesn't and support it with evidence. And these are also institutions that can have the credibility to build long-term relationships with the actors that are needed to support these solutions, because we cannot do it on our own. Not one person alone can approach this problem. So, again, it's a privilege to be part of this group, and I hope that what has just started a few months ago can soon flourish and start giving us results and new alternatives to face these big challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Brodo, for your very insightful interventions and comments. We really appreciate it. You touched on a very, very important subjects of the nexus between development and peace, which is often misunderstood or poorly understood, and is often relegated to the confines of NGOs and other actors. I think you also highlighted the importance and of showcasing failures and success stories, which is something often not terribly documented. And it's important for us to, as global thinkers, to think about some of those issues in terms of learning from our peers in how to promote durable peace and mitigating issues of conflict. I think the lessons that you've shared from us from the region is very important, both in a local, national, and cross-regional perspective. We commend you for showcasing those experiences for us. Now I'd like to turn our attention to Ms. Shugufta Ahmed. She is a senior project officer at the Middle East and North Africa Public Administration Research, MENAPAR. It's an Arab human development think tank. She holds an MBA in Islamic finance from the Open University in Malaysia, and her PhD interest lies in economic justice vis-a-vis historic and modern paradigm. Ms. Ahmed, also from the Global South Global Thinkers Network, will be presenting MENAPAR's think tank network work and offer some reflections on some of the peace and development challenges affecting Bahrain and the wider MENA region. Ms. Ahmed, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hani, for the introduction. I'd like to begin with the Arabic greeting, Assalamu alaikum, which means peace be upon you. And I think given that this forum is about peace and development, it's an apt greeting. I'd like to thank very much Cecilia for inviting us to speak. I echo my colleague Javier's sentiments that it's really an honor and a privilege to be part of this group. We thank the Office of the United Nations of South-South Cooperation to create this space for us to be here and talk about this very important topic. The MENAPAR, as Hani mentioned, this is the Middle East and North Africa Public Administration Research for Human Development think tank. We are an international NGO, which is with a network of Arab think tanks informing our regional vision. We are grateful to the Bahrain Institute of Public Administration, BIPA, and UNDP Bahrain for their instrumental support in our establishment. Our mandate is the development and implementation of an Arab research agenda that promotes evidence-based policy and decision-making in public administration for the development of the citizens and residents of the Arab world, which comprises the 22 Arabic-speaking countries of the League of Arab States. MINAPAR, in its intrinsic nature, is a model of South-South cooperation for knowledge creation and exchanges that occur among member organizations and individuals from government and the civil society. The Arab region is very diverse, with regional blocs such as the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, enjoying very high development status, whereas countries such as Yemen being of the top 10 poorest in the world. War and occupation have left other parts of the Arab world vulnerable on the path towards the implementation of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. The results of the 2018 GPI, the Global Peace Index, find that the global level of peace has deteriorated by 0.27% in the last year, marking the fourth successive year of deteriorations. The 2018 GPI reveals a world in which the tensions, conflicts, and crises that emerged in the past decade remain unresolved, especially in the Middle East, resulting in this gradual, sustained fall in peacefulness. As the words of the G77 Ministerial Declaration 2018 have been echoed consistently throughout this conference as well as in the panel today, that there can be no sustainable development without peace and no peace without sustainable development, MINAPAR is grateful for its membership in the Peace and Development Subgroup of the Global Coalition of Think Tank Networks, as we see it as an opportunity to expand our collective knowledge about positive peace and sustainable development. The output of a think tank is objective knowledge, produced via independent research, which has the potential to take protracted issues out of the domain of politics into the domain of policy. Research into the root causes of conflict is crucial to further the fire prevention versus the firefighting mode of operation. This is the ultimate value add that we believe a group such as the Peace and Development Group can offer from its diverse think tank membership, which covers Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, and very soon, Cecilia mentioned, expanding to Asia. The Arab region, like other Global South countries, faces multiple layers of discrimination and challenges, including poverty and inequality. Focusing on the realization of the SDGs can provide a great opportunity for these countries to raise the living standards of their citizens and residents. Working on the realization of the SDGs must be supported with research, recommendations, and policy dialogue. And these areas can be supported by the Peace and Development Group. MINAPAR hopes to both share as well as learn from other countries of the Global South in the spirit of South-South cooperation as the world globally gains momentum towards the implementation of the SDGs with the noble mandate to leave no one behind. I would like to briefly share with you the results of a recent piece of research MINAPAR conducted on peace building in the Arab region, where we asked our respondents to answer the following question. What do you think the international community might provide to establish peace in the Arab region? The top two responses were as follows. Number one, create special processes to end the humanitarian crises in the region. And number two, produce unbiased, evidence-based analyses and reports of the root causes of conflict in the region. The humanitarian crisis in Yemen, Syria, and Palestine need international attention. According to the UNICEF, a Yemeni child dies every 10 minutes from entirely preventable war-related causes, and thousands have already been killed or injured as a result of conflict. More than 12 million people have been killed or have been forced to flee their homes in Syria. And the situation of Palestine is the most unique, as it is the only state in the 21st century that has still not been granted its rightful national sovereignty in stark violation of UN Resolutions 181, 194, and others. MINAPAR hopes that with membership in the Peace and Development Group, these issues can be brought to the forefront of the Global South and North communities with substantive research on root causes and holistic solutions that address structural issues such as, for example, the democratic deficit in the UN Security Council as called out by Amnesty International. These act as peace blockers, as is evident, for example, in the case of Russia vetoing human rights investigations in Syria. Research that identifies peace enablers and peace blockers can go a long way in conflict prevention. Natural calamities are beyond human control. However, we can and should attempt to address man-made calamities, that is, wars and conflict, not just fight them, but prevent them. The 20th century was rife with wars, World War I, World War II, the Cold War. We hope that with the efforts of the Peace and Development Group and its global leverage via the UN, the 21st century and those beyond can be centuries of peace that our children and generations to come can enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ahmed, for your very detailed presentation on some of the key issues affecting the MENA region in the areas of peace and development. You've highlighted the intrinsic connection between peace and development and the importance of addressing the root causes of conflict. Obviously, it's much more desirable and cost-effective to put resources in terms of looking at conflict prevention mechanisms rather than conflict peace building. Obviously, the MENA region is one of the most affected regions by conflicts, and its attainment of the SDGs is hindered by its ability to ensure durable peace in the region. And this is something that's of importance in the work that you're doing in looking at the root causes of conflict in the region, and in terms of systematizing, looking at processes and procedures, and in terms of how to address some of these conflicts in the first place. I would like to now move to Professor Manuela Viana. She is an adjunct professor at the Institute of International Relations at Pontifical Catholic University in Rio de Janeiro, where she also coordinates the undergraduate program in international relations. She holds a PhD in international politics from IRI in Brazil, and she's also a research fellow at the Center for Military Studies in Stellenbosch. Professor Viana will be presenting the main findings of the paper, The Case of South-South Cooperation for Peace and Development, that we have highlighted earlier. It's a research paper developed by the BRICS Policy Center in Brazil and the Global South Thinkers on Peace and Development. In addition to her involvement with this report, she's also going to be presenting Ms. Isabel Rocha de Sequeira, Senior Researcher on International Developments at the BRICS Policy Center in Brazil, who is the main author of the report. Unfortunately, she's unable to join us today, but would like to acknowledge her involvement and her work as the main author of the report. Professor Viana, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Hani, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Cecilia, her colleagues, and the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation for the opportunity to share my thoughts with all of you today, but also the Peace and Development Global South Thinkers Group for welcoming me in this inspired exchange of ideas and experiences. My objective today is to present you the main findings of the paper titled The Case for South-South Cooperation on Peace and Development, prepared by Isabel Rocha from the BRICS Policy Center in Rio de Janeiro, in the context of approximation of BAPA plus 40. The paper maps the positions that have been adopted by southern countries as regards the intricate relation between peace and development, and discusses how Global South perspectives and tools, most especially South-South cooperation, can contribute to the overcoming of challenges related to peace and development in the Global South. In order to make explicit the importance of such a debate, as my colleagues have already done here, I would like to speak from my specific position not only as a Brazilian, but also as a Latin American scholar. As you may know, there is a strong and constraining image that came to be associated with Latin America in the past few years, that of the most violent region in the world. Indeed, the region circumscribes 8% of the world's population, but also 33% of its homicides. Of the 20 countries in the world with the highest murder rates, 17 are Latin American, as are 43 of the top 50 cities. In this sense, most of the population in Latin America simply cannot afford dodging the discussion on the intimate connections between peace and development. However, it is important to highlight, as many speakers in the GSSD Expo have, that much has been done in this regard through South-South cooperation. In the past 4 decades, South-South cooperation has grown in scale and volume, as you can see in the slides, becoming an important force in global development. From 2006 to 2013, the United Nations Development Programme estimates that South-South cooperation flows grew from 8.6 billion to 19 billion. And from 2015 to 2017, the proportion of developing countries providing development cooperation increased from 63% to 74%. In the case of Latin America, for instance, countries in the region have participated in the implementation of 1,475 South-South initiatives and 159 triangular cooperation initiatives. Among those, South-South cooperation has been increasingly mobilized towards initiatives related to peace and development. If it is true that South-South cooperation engagement on peace and development has been taking place for a long time, it is also true that, first, this has been done without a consistent degree of coordination between development and peace actors. Second, that the type of cooperation has been little documented. And third, that reporting is currently divided in silos done separately by security and development actors. The discussions to take place at BAPA Plus 40 are key for South-South cooperation to respond to the era of transformations we are living in. In this context, the centrality of the intimate connection between peace and development in the 2030 Agenda deserves attention in the articulation of responses by South-South cooperation mechanisms. In taking this political momentum as an opportunity, the perspectives from the Global South must not only be heard, they must take the protagonism in the circulation of values, experiences, and lessons that will shape those new responses, as well as in the elaboration of methodologies and metrics that will be mobilized in the assessment of the impact of South-South cooperation initiatives. In this sense, bridging knowledge and expertise in order to better capitalize the political momentum for South-South cooperation, as well as the leadership of countries in the Global South in that process, are the key messages that have to be addressed in the reflections taking place here. Particularly, this involves approaching the following questions. What contributions can South-South cooperation bring to peace and development agenda? How can a more definite and robust incorporation of peace and development into South-South cooperation enhance South-South cooperation itself? What principles are indispensable for no one to be left behind? And finally, how to take stock of what has already been done? As the idea underlining the phrasing bridging knowledge and expertise already suggests, there is a lot going on in South-South cooperation as regards peace and development. This means that part of the nodes to be explored in the institutional fabric necessary for this bridge are already there. They just need to be connected so that the communication and learning flowing among those nodes is more effective and allows for a greater coherence among this constellation of initiatives. One of those already existent initiatives that has a lot to contribute in this regard is the platform South-South Global Thinkers, most notably the Peace and Development Global South Thinkers group within that platform. For the GSSD Expo in particular, the group actively participated in the discussions leading to the production of the paper titled The Case for South-South Cooperation on Peace and Development. I would like to conclude my intervention, if I may put it that way, with some of the contributions made by this paper, which is in itself a concrete result of a collective effort. Firstly, the paper maps the Southern positions regarding peace, and you can find on page 71 the beginning of an extensive table that covers and exposes the positions taken by Southern countries regarding peace, sustaining peace, and the connections between peace and development. And as I mentioned, when we distribute these copies to you, they are all systematized in a table annexed to the paper on page 71. A second contribution offered by the paper is related to the analysis on how South-South cooperation and regional and cross-regional approaches to cooperation have been positively contributing to peace and development in the Global South. Finally, the paper also provides some recommendations in context of BAPA Plus 40 and the road to peace and development through the 2030 Agenda. As food for the preparatory discussions that are already taking place towards BAPA Plus 40, I have separated the recommendations nurtured by the paper in 3 domains which are key for a self-aware action in the world when it comes to peace and development. Of course, learning is the first one as a constantly necessary oxygen for the worldviews informing policies and projects operating in the intersections of peace and security, of peace and development, sorry. The paper recommends that countries invest in the production of systematic knowledge on current peace and development initiatives from a Global South perspective, but that they also learn from process-oriented methodologies produced in the South, and map what lessons can be learned from regional and cross-regional experience regarding South-South cooperation on peace and development. Underlying this set of recommendations, we can find questions such as, what knowledge production do we need for a better learning? And how do we build our conceptions of betterhood from the initiatives already taking place? Doing is the second domain I would like to highlight. The recommendations made by the paper in this regard are the following. To include in national documents and speeches in preparation for BAPA Plus 40, descriptive but also prescriptive thoughts on South-South cooperations on peace and development. To enhance multi-stakeholder partnerships in South-South cooperation initiatives on peace and development. And finally, to move from effectiveness to coherence when discussing the role of South-South cooperation on peace and development, that is, to assess not only results but also the processes that led to them, as well as the principles guiding those processes and results. Behind these sets of recommendations, there is a concern related to how and with whom can a better South-South cooperation on peace and development be advanced. Finally, a third dimension is learning while doing. After all, the hands-on world never stops while we are thinking what could be done better. Here, the paper recommends that the countries mobilize both quantitative and qualitative analysis in M&E systems, that they strengthen southern channels and mobilize UN bodies aiming at improving cross-regional information flow and experience sharing. And finally, that they encourage southern countries to work on a cohesive discourse on their commitment regarding peace and development. In this domain, I'm finishing. In this domain, I would say that a central question is how learning and doing are connected, not only when it comes to assessing effectiveness, but also coherence. These recommendations are promising paths for us to build a robust institutional fabric of South-South cooperation on peace and development. Such a process is of extreme relevance in the context of BAPA Plus 40 and the 2030 Agenda, but also in a context in which many countries in Latin America, for instance, have been reconsidering the South as the privileged site for the articulation of solutions to development. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Viana, for your very detailed presentation on a very rich paper in terms of its contribution to knowledge creation, generation, and dissemination of good practices, experiences, and policy recommendations, the case for South-South cooperation for peace and development. I congratulate you, and I would welcome all of you to read the paper and provide comments to the contributors. Now, for our final presentation, we have Professor Tim Shaw, Professorial Fellow in the Department of Conflict Resolution, Human Security, and Global Governance at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Until recently, he was the Program Director for the PhD program at UMass on Global Governance and Human Security. Professor Shaw has also directed previously the Institute of Commonwealth Studies at the University of London, where he remains a Professor Emeritus. He holds a PhD from University of Princeton University. Professor Shaw will be discussing selected findings and share expert research on international academic and policy research in the area of conflict prevention, peace for development, and the relevance for South-South cooperation on peace and development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hani. Good afternoon, and I'm very pleased to express my appreciation to Grace and Hanny and Cecilia for making this possible, and also happily what I want to say builds on what Hanny said in his overview about conflict challenging SSC and SDGs, and Cecilia's point about juxtaposing peace and development with SSC. And the last paper, in a sense, continues to develop ideas from the previous panel about theory and policy and criteria, particularly around China's Belt and Road Initiative. In addition to the PhD, though, Hanny, let me just mention that my first MA in Uganda was before everybody in this room was born in the late 1960s. So there is a degree of history behind what I want to say. And I've been very pleased to be involved in the board, helping to revise the drafts of the report on SSC for BAPA 40, a process which obviously will accelerate as the new year approaches. So what I want to say is very much informed by the PhD at UMass Boston, but also 35 years of editing an IPE series for Palgrave Macmillan, which has always had a focus on the Global South and includes a mini-series on South-South relations over the last decade, i.e. the advancement of knowledge. South-South cooperation, of course, blossomed in the last decade, given the rise of the Global South. So the report will obviously capture the dynamism and potential as the old North is in some disarray and the new South, the BRICS, emerging markets in ascendancy. But it will continue to need to be redefined, revitalized, given the type of pushback that Cecilia indicated is likely in terms of some of these ideas as we get to 2030 and the SDGs. And I think the involvement of NGOs, think tanks, and multinationals in peace and development will be one strategy to deal with conservative regimes. But we also have to deal with non-traditional security, particularly in Africa, and now because of climate change, the water, energy, food, or the water, energy, land nexus, which has continued to intensify in fragile and failed states, particularly in the middle belt of Africa. And therefore, I would re-emphasize what has already been said about the importance of citizen and human security, given the toll of homicides in Rio and other parts of Latin America, and certainly having studied and taught in Trinidad for 4 years, it too suffers from a lack of human security. Moreover, these relationships, these new forms of insecurity, including obviously money laundering, are becoming very transnational and global because of migrations, because of diasporas. And so there is a global interest in this agenda of peace and development through SSC. I'm beginning to be involved myself through the Institute of Peace and Security Studies at the University of Addis Ababa on 3 post-conflict states in Eastern Africa as a case study. But obviously they are neighbors to a series of ungoverned spaces such as Somalia, Congo, the Sahel, etc. And so the importance of recognizing emerging developmental states at the turn of the century, turn of the decade, it seems to me, is important. Let me then just conclude with a couple of takeaways, particularly out of Africa and the Global South. One is the growing importance reflected in the mini-series of both academic and policy interest in the Global South. And I think that the report can usefully pick up on that momentum, which includes obviously the spread of NGO and think tank networking. And secondly, to recognize that developmental states are not necessarily a monopoly of East Asia, but that South-South cooperation may be advancing their proliferation in East Africa, along with, in the case of Africa, the established developmental states of countries like Botswana and Mauritius. Hence, therefore, as we move to revise the report, it seems to me of increasing relevance for BAPA plus 40 as a landmark for both the redefinition of South-South cooperation, but also its revitalization, and as a lingering source of global multilateralism, which, as we all know, is increasingly under threat from nationalisms and unilateralisms, particularly coming out of the global north. So I think it's a very timely initiative now to be encouraged through the juxtaposition of peace and development with South-South cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Shah, for your very insightful presentation, looking at the global agenda around the nexus for peace and development, given the proliferation and the spread of development and security challenges that are largely borderless and cross-regional. Obviously, your involvement in the development of our independent report, a flagship publication of the UN Office for South-South Cooperation in preparation for BAPA plus 40, is important in securing and ensuring that issues around peace and development is very much included in some way or another in the report. So I thank you very much for your continued support for our office. Given the limitations of time, we've already exhausted, but I would like to invite all of you to have a few questions for our esteemed presenters. If there's a few questions we can take from the floor. Please do highlight who the question is addressed to, and do present your name and your accreditation.
Thank you. It is not a question, but quickly, it is a contribution and exchange of experience.
Please introduce yourself first.
I am Ambassador Bernard. I am based in Bujumbura, in the capital. I'm in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I first of all thank the United Nations Office for South Cooperation for organizing this platform, and also I commend all the panelists for their wonderful presentation. I have been inspired, and it is very important. And I wish to highlight that peace and development are linked, as we have been discussing it yesterday, and we often say it in the fora, in other fora. What I'd like to say particularly, it is that my country, Burundi, has successful stories and can give share experience with you in terms of peace and security. Just to remind you, some decades or some years ago, we have been going through a difficult period, but at a given time, there have been negotiations. We had as mediator Nelson Mandela. We reached an agreement. Now, for example, if I turn in terms of security, former combatant and governmental troops merged, and they reached something, and they formed, I'd say, an army which is now helping other countries as peacemaking, like in Somalia, in the Republic of Central African Republic, in Haiti, and so on. Then, there are something we could highlight or give as testimony how we reached those, we have been able to reach those steps. And also, we can also give a testimony how poverty is one of the root cause of conflicts, as one of the panelists has highlighted it. And also, we could share how slowly by slowly we managed to overcome some of the challenges. And now, for example, we have what we call Truth and the Reconciliation Commission. It is doing its job in Burundi, and it is a successful story. I'm sorry. But also now we are in what we are saying we call National Development Plan. It means that we now have been able to recover peace. We are able to stick on development. It is just something I wish to share with you. And since we have that wrong experience in that matter, I think Burundi can give its testimony in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very insightful contribution. I would like to take a few more, and before I ask the presenters to respond, here. Please present yourself first.
Hello, everyone. My name is Wei Ting Lo. I'm from Young Women. Thank you so much for this very inspiring panel discussion. I would like to take this advantage to ask a question about the rationale behind the pushback on the nexus between peace and development. Because I heard one of the rationale is that in development sector, there are already very scarce resources, particularly like funding. So if we put this link together, there might be like dilution from development to peace and security. So I don't know whether it's the truth or not. And because we have so many experts here, I would like to just ask this question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. Are there any questions, comments from the floor before I ask our presenters to respond? All right. Let me then give the opportunity for each of our presenters to provide some comments on those two interventions.
So the pushback, there are different dimensions of a pushback, right? But in my case, I can tell you a little bit more what has been in relation to our office in particular. We doing more work on South-South cooperation and peace and development. Our office in particular listened more to the G77 plus China. This is our constituency, and of course we have a mandate from the General Assembly and from the Secretary General, but the G77 plus China is the main grouping of Global South together who we engage with. And they are the ones shaping and sustaining the South-South cooperation agenda globally, and with a strong voice, differentiating themselves from the OECD countries or developed countries. So in that process, at the beginning, we proposed to do South-South cooperation on peace building, but as I said, they perceived that the idea of peace building is still very much connected with a global North approach. One is this approach is linear, so the idea that peace building is happening after the conflict has been managed or contained. And the Global South countries believe, or many of them believe, that it's about addressing the root causes of conflicts. So it doesn't necessarily link with a linear approach, but it links with looking at the systemic root causes of conflict, and most of the time, or many times, related with poverty, different type of exclusions, the lack of sensitive natural resources management. So looking at only peace without looking at the interrelation with these factors could be misleading, in their opinion. So this is also why, and you can see that in this report, many of the Global South countries oppose to the idea of having a SDG 16. And they don't want to say that peace is only about good governance, rule of law, or strengthening institutions. They want to say that peace is about giving women's opportunities, giving, empowering the young people, giving educational opportunities, ensuring that there is access to water. So it's a very diverse, very holistic and interrelated agenda, and they want to maintain this approach. That's why then we decided to call it peace and development, just to show this interrelation and not only linking it with purely mediation, management, containing of conflict, or securitized responses to violence. So having this human security, human approach, and this holistic approach for them is very important. So I think this is one of the main. But again, you will. I think hopefully you will read that a little bit more from the policy positions in the paper.
Thank you very much, Cecilia.
Can I just add just a tiny point regarding, well, at least Brazil? I would say that there is also a a fear from demands related to transparency, precisely if we consider that many countries in Latin America are facing a significant process of militarization of public security. So in this sense, there is a lot going on also in many countries in Latin America that creates a certain resistance or hesitation, at least, towards demands or pressures towards greater transparency on that domain that perhaps may be linked to the intersection between peace and development. Just a short add.
Thank you very much for your intervention and response. Okay, great. There is I'll take one more question and we have to wrap up.
To the panel, have you seen civic societies or groups that have been doing peace building without being aware of that as a sustainable development goal, where if you had helped to give the language to the people who are on the ground trying to make change, to make those implementations, that they would be able to coordinate better with you to produce the kind of development and peace building together. I think that the synergy is there. We have people on the ground who are working, but maybe there's something that could happen. I myself, we had a youth group that created 60 prosthetic hands and 18 arms, sent them to the Ziv Medical Center for Syrian refugees and for building, but this was not part of our vocabulary or knowledge, and we could coordinate.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Well, really briefly, I mean, if I understood well the question, I would say that I am a bit critical in as regards how civil society is recurrently understood. And when we say we must consult or make consultations towards civil society, in my view, there is a lot of work to do in terms of expanding the range of actors that are involved or considered when we say civil society in an environment such as this one. Coming from Rio de Janeiro, for instance, many institutions working directly in the favelas, the slums in Rio de Janeiro, they are not even close to being consulted in international policy processes. So it is time that we, and that is why it's so important hearing the perspectives such as the one Javier brought to the table, because then when we think that the international is present in the local, then we don't see as distant, this effort to listen to on the ground the actors that are already working towards peace in the conditions of how can I say this, lack of oxygen for that in Rio de Janeiro, for instance, in the slums. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Viana, for your intervention. We really have... Okay, I'll just... One more intervention.
I just want to underline the importance of the work that is being done in the sense of bringing in the debate of peace, of security, and linking it with South-South cooperation, because there has been a lot of concrete participation of the South in the whole realm and the whole scenarios of conflict, of different sorts of conflict, of participation of different stakeholders. But it's the first time that you organize this agenda in a structured, in an intellectual, and of course, normative sense. And I think this is a very important initiative. That's all.
No, thank you very much. We all agree, completely agree. If I would take this opportunity to give one closing remark, obviously this event has helped solidify the arguments we've just heard in terms of the evidence, the debates from representatives of think tanks, civil society organizations, and UN agencies on the importance of Southern solidarity and cooperation to achieve a world of peace and inclusive development. I would encourage you to continue this debate offline and online, and to provide us your comments on our report and our publications, and to continue this engagement further on. This is not the end of this discussion, but only the beginning. Thank you very much. I would like to take this opportunity to invite you all to give a big applause to our presenters today.
Thank you, Hani.